us a bit more about what the French president had to say.
Well, in fact, Jeannie, it was exceptional timing, really, these responses to this climate convention. Of course, the president was not only talking to the 150 citizens, if you will, in the Élysée Gardens, but also to the French public as a whole, coming off the back of course, this green wave of results during the municipal elections of yesterday. He went to lengths, as we just heard in that quick soundbite, to admit that errors had been made in the past and that the introduction of a carbon tax without consultation of the public was in fact a mistake he accepted he had made, and that this was time it was going to be different. Of the 149 measures that were put forward in this 600-page report, the president said he was ready to take on board 146 of the measures. They'll be considered and presented as a package of laws to the Assembly between now and the end of summer. However, there were some sticking points, as I mentioned, 146 of 149. The president liked to call them jokers, if you will. One of them was, of course, the fact that there was a very controversial measure of limiting the speed limit on motorways to 110 kilometres per hour from 130 kilometres per hour. The president choosing to, in his own words, put it on hold, given that it was such a controversial measure, and he was afraid that perhaps the whole package of measures would be defined by this one measure. Another one, he doesn't want to introduce a tax on dividends to fund the ecological transition. Another particular sticking point was a call to introduce in the Constitution a change in terms of environmental rights. Now, the president has said that he didn't want to change the preamble to the Constitution. However, he was willing to change and ready to accept a change to Article 1 to include the climate change, biodiversity and the environment in Article 1. And he is willing to take it to a referendum if needed. And of course, the other sticking point is this idea of ecocide, that the destruction of the nature becomes a crime. This is a term that Emmanuel Macron, in fact, himself coined during the Amazon forest fires. He wants to see this term taken up at an international level. He's going to lobby for it to be recognised. And at a French level, he says he's going to study it. Given it's a penal crime law, it needs to be studied at a further extent. He can't just give a green light to that straight away, but in the hope of eventual referendum, if that's possible.
Mairead, tell us a bit more about what parts of this report then were indeed approved, and what exactly is this Citizens' Convention on the Climate?
In fact, I've focused on the sticking points, but 146 of the measures were given the green light. Emmanuel Macron kept using the words in French, allons-y, allons-y, let's go, let's go. Many of the measures were talking about food waste, for example, reducing food waste, limiting publicity, if you will, for products that have high emissions. Another measure is, of course, on online. In terms of cutting consumption, every time you purchase an online item, there'll be a question that comes up, do you really need this? Turning green spaces, more green spaces in city, not building on protected areas. The president was totally in favour of all of these measures, keeping in mind that these measures had come from 150 ordinary citizens. They'd been selected randomly. They aged from 16 to 80 years old. They were school students and retired tradespeople. And so these measures really came not from technocrats or people that have been working in the climate for a long time, but from people who were seeing and living the effects of climate change every day. And for most of these measures, the president is willing to see them put into a package of laws and presented to the Assembly.
Mairead, thank you for that. France 24's environment editor Mairead Dundas.